Good morning, or depending when you're watching this, good afternoon, good evening, or good night. My name's Ross, and I was always told how to voice radio, so today I'm bringing you another winning deck list. This is the deck list with which the lovely Pablo Meza went and won Mexican Nationals, which, as of the time of recording, is the largest Nationals we've so far had this year, and is the largest Nationals in the history of Mexican Pokemon trading card game goodness. So, shall we say, quite the achievement. Now, the other really impressive thing about Pablo, he runs a YouTube channel, Tablemon. I've chucked a link down in the description. Go check it out. He's been chronicling his journey this year. And I've been watching a bunch of his videos. They're very good. I highly recommend them. And I've been thinking, this is all going to go a bit pear-shaped if he doesn't do well at Nationals. Well, no danger there, ladies and gentlemen. He only went and won Nationals. Now, as always, with these winning deck lists, I should point out this is not my deck list. I did not make this deck list. It is a deck list which has been made by somebody else on which I am just commenting. The brilliant thing is, this video was kind of requested by Pablo himself. So I do hope, Pablo, that this is good enough, and I'm sorry if it's a little bit rubbish. He saw my Tour Direct Lev Norway winning list video, and he said, hey, you doing this for all of them? Do you want a picture of mine? And I said, yes, I do. And he sent a picture just for me, and that makes me happy. So, we are playing Greninja, and I've already done a Greninja video. It is actually the most popular video I've ever done on this channel. Again, you know the deal, link in the description. And that video goes through everything nicely, but it is a little bit older now. It is a few weeks old, and of course, people have been asking for a list, so here we go. Now, we start off with 4 Froakie, obviously it's Froakie, 4 Frogadier, obviously it's Frogadier. But both of these have things we should be thinking about. So, for instance, we've got the Froakie, and it's got the attack bubble. Flip a coin, if heads, the active Pokemon is paralyzed. Now, that might seem like a little thing, but this is a slow deck, a deck that can take a few turns to set up. Sometimes with this deck, you need to buy a turn or two to keep going. Bubble allows you to do it. Frogadier has water duplicates, and this is one of the things that makes this Stage 2 deck viable. Stage 2 decks are usually a bit slow, a bit rubbish. Frogadier breaks the trend, and one of the reasons is water duplicates on the Frogadier. You can get one Frogadier out, and then you just use water duplicates, and you get to grab the rest of your Frogadiers from your deck and put them on your bench. Hopefully none will be prized. And this does lead to interesting situations where things happen, like you might not play a supporter because you've already got the water duplicates, and you don't want to risk drawing into a Frogadier and then not being able to grab it off the water duplicates. We then have 3 Greninjas. We've got the X and Y Greninja. The attack is fine, 50 damage, it's alright. But what we're really looking at here is the ability Water Shuriken. Discard a water energy from your hand, place 3 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And this combos very, very nicely with Greninja Break, this being a further evolution of Greninja, where you discard an energy from your hand and put 6 damage counters on one of your opponent's Pokemon. And between the two, I mean, you could, in theory, have 2 Greninja Breaks and 1 X and Y Greninja. So what you could actually do here is go ahead and use 2 Giant Water Shurikens and a Water Shuriken in one turn, because you can only use Giant Water Shuriken if it's active, but you can retreat into another one, and the Breakpoint Greninja has free retreat. And you can be placing 15 damage counters before you even attack. Now, one of the weird things about Pablo's list, and I like Pablo's list a lot, and one of the things I love about Pablo's list is that it is a little bit unconventional. It gives us things to talk about. And the first unconventional thing here is the fact that he's only playing 2 Greninja Break. Now, most of the list, the standard list, play 3 Greninja Break. Now, there are arguments for and against playing 2 Greninja Break here. The argument for playing 2 is that you rarely need 3, and you're playing Super Odd, and you're playing Sacred Ash so you can recover them. So it really doesn't matter that much. By 3, I mean 3 at one time. Obviously, you might well need 3 or 4 in one game, but you rarely need more than 2 in one go. The argument against playing 2 is that if you have 1 or, heaven forbid, 2 prized, or you have to discard 1 or 2 in the early game and can't draw into your super rod, that can give you some awkward hands. We've all had those situations where we've had to discard a couple of stage 2s and a super rod in the same go, and that could be a bit risky here, but it worked for Pablo, and I quite like it, because whenever I was playing Greninja, I was always tempted to drop down to 2. Now, although we can break evolve the X and Y Greninja, the main one we're going for here, we are break evolving the Breakpoint Greninja. 2 really good attacks. Shadow Stitching does 40 damage and ability locks your opponent the following turn. You come up against a deck like, it's not played very often, but Mega Alakazam. They're just going to lose when you start Shadow Stitching. Even a deck like Metal, you can really slow them down with Shadow Stitching Genesect. Yes, I know there's a Bronzong from Fates Collide that can stop you, but unless they get that out, you're sitting pretty. And Greninja Breakpoint also has a fun little second attack, Moonlight Slash. 60 damage if you don't put an energy back to your hand, 80 damage if you do. It's the highest damage attack you can do. And when you put the energy back into your hand, you've then got it in your hand ready next turn for Water Shuriken and Giant Water Shuriken. And that's all fairly standard. Pablo plays 2 Jirachi, the promo ones, 10 damage for 1 energy, and discard a special energy attached to your opponent's active Pokemon. Now, there's 2 things you can do with this. Number 1, you can run your opponent out of special energy. Think decks like Night March, where if they run out of double colourless energy, they just lose. Now, I was commentating the Italian National Championships this year, and I watched 2 games where one player discarded all of the other's energy, and then that player scooped. One using Xerosic, one using Jirachi. It can happen. But most often in a deck like this, you use it just to buy yourself a little bit of time. I've said about buying a time with Bubble, you can buy a time with Stardust. And that brings us to the last Pokemon in the deck, and this is the really unconventional part of Pablo's list. He plays a 2-1 Octillery line. Most people do not play Octillery. Now, the reason he plays a 2-1 line is, I imagine, because you need to get the Remoraid out quickly. And if you're only playing 1, it might be prized in the early game or whatever. It can be really awkward getting it going. You need to get it out sooner rather than later. Whereas with a 1 Octillery, you can afford to take a turn or 2 until you get the Octillery out and just have the Remoraid down. The other thing that might happen, of course, is that the Remoraid could be KO'd early, in which case you then have to recover it before you can evolve it. Whereas, if 1 gets KO'd, you've still got a second. Once you're set up and running, you really don't mind if the Octillery gets KO'd that much, because if the Octillery's getting KO'd, they're not KOing your Greninjas. Although, of course, Octillery's good. Why do we play Octillery, though? We play it for the ability Abyssal Hand. It really looks like it should say Abysmal, but it doesn't. Draw until you got 5 cards. It's brilliant. It's really, really useful. It fills up your hand. It means you can draw into these cards like Fisherman that you need in the late game. It adds consistency when you get it up and rolling. And because it's a water Pokemon, you can use Dive Ball. And because it's got less than 90 HP, you can go and use Level Ball. It's very easy to search Octillery and Remoraid out. And it gives you that added consistency. Let's not forget that N is back in the format. More on him in a moment. And if your opponent plays an N in the mid to late game, that can be very bad for you. You can use Octillery to draw out of it. Of course, you can play an N, but you and your opponent down to low hands, but then you can immediately use Octillery to draw out of it. Octillery, you can see Pablo's had to make cuts like the third Greninja break to put it in, but it's a very good inclusion here, and it really does increase the consistency of the deck. It's hard to say anything constructive about the energy count. Pablo went for 8 water energy. I think that's the same amount I played when I played Greninja. With water counts and energy counts of any description, you just test and see what feels right, and if he's put 8, that's probably about right. Now, one of the things which I really like about this deck, and a lot of Greninja decks do this to be honest, but this may be more than most, 4 Dive Ball, 3 Ultra Ball, 1 Level Ball. Dive Ball allows you to search for any water Pokemon. Ultra Ball allows you to search for any Pokemon as long as you discard 2 cards from your hand. which combos very nicely, of course, with Octillery, because if you've got Octillery out, you can lower the amount of cards in your hand, and then you draw more when you use Octillery's Abyssal Hand ability. And one level ball allows you to grab anything that is not a Greninja, has less than 90 HP, so anything other than that. The main thing is, all 8 allow you to grab a Froakie and a Frogadier. You need that turn 2 water duplicates. And of course, the fact that you're playing Octillery here just means you need to be able to search out these Pokemon. So I like the amount of Pokemon search here. I really, really do. Level Ball seems like a good inclusion, but it's got to be Ultra Ball over Level Ball mostly, purely because Ultra Ball gets Greninjas, Level Ball doesn't. Looking at the supporters, we have 4 copies of N. N is the best supporter card in this particular deck, hands down. Because in the early game, it just gives you a hand refresh. Both players shuffle their hand into their deck, draw a number of cards equal to the remaining prizes. N here gives you cards early game, but this is a deck that falls behind early and often. This deck plays from behind. N is a comeback card, so it's perfect. Not to mention in the late game, say you've got 2 prizes remaining each, like I said, you can end your opponent, then use Octillery to draw cards. Weirdly, there are no Ace Trainers in here. That's a common inclusion in Greninja decks that Pablo has chosen not to play. He's gone for 4N, 0 Ace Trainer. I think the fact that it combos so nicely for him with Octillery may be one reason. Even if it's not, it's still a reason to do so. There's an argument for an Ace Trainer or two. Not here, apparently. Free Professor Sycamore because, well, it's the most aggressive supporter in the format at the moment. You discard your hand, you draw 7 cards. The only real downside of Sycamore is that you could run into situations where you discard too much in the early game. But because you're playing Super Rod and Sacred Ash and Fisherman in this deck, you should be absolutely fine. A 4th Sycamore here would be a good thing. Space, quite frankly. And then, like with every deck nowadays, we've got a bunch of one-off supporters. Fisherman, it gets 4 energy from the discard into your hand. You need that not only to attack with Greninja, but also to be able to go ahead and do a whole bunch of water shurikens and giant water shurikens, so I don't think we can blame anybody for that. 1 copy of Lysander. Now, this is also something slightly unusual. I'm telling you that Pablo's not playing a standard list here, and I mean that very sincerely. I've been to I've been to 3 national championships this year in Europe. And I've seen a whole bunch of Greninja deck lists. And a lot of them don't play Lysander. Now, I am a huge fan of playing 1 Lysander. The reason a lot of people don't is because you've got the abilities of Greninja and Greninja Break to drop damage counters, to knock out things on the bench. But there's so many games where you want that Lysander. Now, you only play the 1. And that's because you don't always need it. But there are some games you do. 1 copy of AZ, so you can pick stuff up and put it back down again. It allows you to heal your Pokemon. It allows you to pick up Pokemon that are about to be KO'd. Again, it's not something that every Greninja deck list plays, but AZ is it's a one-of in most decks, and there's a good reason why. It allows you to heal Pokemon. And 1 copy of Wally. And the reason is, now Wally does 2 things. Number 1, if you're lucky enough to draw into Wally in the early game, yay, that means you can go ahead and if you go second, you can go Froakie, Wally into Frogadier, water duplicates, turn 1. That's not something you're going to do very often. There'll be the odd turn here or there, the odd game here or there where you can. But it's not just for that. There are games where you're going to go Evolve into Greninja and then Wally into Greninja Break, for instance. Or maybe in the mid-game, you want to you want to evolve into Frogadier and then Wally into Greninja. It's got so much utility. And all of these supporters, you can play them as a one-off because of the card Versus Seeker. You play 4 Versus Seeker in this deck because you play 4 Versus Seeker in every deck where you don't train a lock yourself. I'm looking at you, Vileplume. So it's just good, and you can play these one-off supporters, so you can grab Wally whenever you need it after it hits the discard pile. Same with Fisherman, AZ, Lysander. It's just too good, quite frankly. 3 copies of Rough Seas. Rough Seas is the stadium of choice in Greninja. It allows you to heal 30 damage from each Pokemon, other than your Jirachi, every single turn. It's what wins you games against decks like Trevenant, who drop free damage counters, or at least Trevenant Break does, on each of your Pokemon, but it also just allows you to heal. Given, of course, that Greninja from Breakpoint has got free retreat, the temptation to just retreat and heal with Rough Seas, while you sit behind something like a Froakie using Bubble or a Jirachi using Stardust, it's something you're going to want to do. And the last few cards, free Trainer's Mail. It's Trainer's Mail. Everybody loves Trainer's Mail. It allows you to search out cards from your, or not search out, but it allows you to look at the top 4 cards of your deck, find any trainer card there, put it in your hand. It allows you to dig for cards like your Dive Balls to get Greninja, or things of that nature. 3 rather than 4 is a little bit low, but again, Pablo's playing cards like a 2-1 Octillery list and Lysander, and spaces have got to be cut somewhere, and cutting a Trainer's Mail is a thing to do. And let's not forget that once you've got your Octillery up and running, it is less of an issue that you've only got 3 Trainer's Mail rather than 4. We then play 1 Sacred Ash, 1 Super Rod. These are recovery cards. You are going to need in most games more than 4 Greninja, and you may end up discarding things early. Sacred Ash gets you 5 Pokemon. Super Rod gets you 3 in any combination of energy or Pokemon. Usually you'll use it for Pokemon, but sometimes you need some water energy in your deck so that you can then draw into it. And, one thing you can do here is play Super Rod to put energy in your deck, and then immediately use Octillery in the hope of drawing into it to use a Giant Water Shuriken or something of that nature. They're recovery cards. Along with Fisherman, they work really well. Free Sycamore is aggressive in a deck like Greninja, but it's helped by these recovery cards. 1 copy of Startling Megaphone, because, well, it's Startling Megaphone. It means you can do stuff like discard your opponent's tools. Well, in fact, that's exactly what you do. But things like Fighting Fury Bout can make it very difficult to hit the numbers. That's okay, because you play Startling Megaphone to get rid of it, and you can hit those numbers to get the KO more easily. And of course, there's things like Bursting Balloon that some decks might play you can get rid of. Or Muscle Band, you see where I'm going with this. Or even Floatstone to strand stuff in the active. If you can strand something in the active, let's say you play a Lysander on a Hooper, and your opponent's stuck in the active and can't move the Hooper, you can use all of your abilities to take out the bench. Again, it's one of these plays that's not going to work every game, but on the games it does, it may be the difference between a win and a loss. And then, of course, we've got 1 copy of Muscle Band to finish off the list. Why? But it just helps you hit numbers. You can't afford to play more than 1 Muscle Band. But there are situations where you might be 10 or 20 damage short. Muscle Band allows you to do that extra damage. I like Pablo's list. It's not the standard Greninja list, because of the Octillery, because of the 2 Greninja break. Lysander is not always played in every Greninja list, etc., etc. What's he cut down? Well, he's cut to 3 Rough Seas. Some decks play 4. He's cut to 3 Trainer's Mail. Most decks play 4. And I say again, he's cut a Greninja break. So he has had to cut some cards to make room for other cards. And I suppose no Ace Trainers are an interesting thing, but it worked for him. He won Mexican Nationals. I like this list. It's a list I'm looking forward to playing with. Now, firstly, thank you to Pablo for taking the picture for me, sending it over, allowing me to do the video, and I don't have to say I hope Pablo's cool with me commenting on his deck. He's actively asked me to, so cheers, Pablo. Lovely man. Say that very sincerely. I played Pablo once at Worlds 2012. He destroyed me. He actually took all 6 prizes in 1 turn, and rather than being upset that I lost, I had to just marvel at how beautiful it was. Now, there is a comment section, ladies and gentlemen. Use it. Tell me what you think of this list. Tell me what you like. Tell me what you would change. Give me a Greninja list of your own, etc. There is a like button. Click it, click it, click it, click it, click it. Have you clicked it yet? Good. Thank you very much. And of course, there is a subscribe button, which you should have clicked by now. If you haven't, do so. If you have, you know the deal. Get a friend to subscribe on your behalf. And as always, ladies and gentlemen, by far the most important thing, look after yourselves till next time. Thank you very much for watching. My name is Ross, and you've been watching PTCG Radio.